Hello. My guest today is Professor Richard Suchenski. Hello, Richard.
Hello, nice to see you.
I'm very happy that you found the time to talk to me. This is not a regular episode of my podcast, but it's a video that I wanted to post on my video channel because for the past couple of years, I've been following the activities and the project that you started and that you are working on almost constantly, from what I see, called Film Secession. And I really feel like it's an extremely valuable initiative in the current, let's say, online environment of cinephilia. And I'm very passionate about bringing the news about it to more people. So I do hope that people do watch this video and learn about your project and start following it as well. So if you could just start by introducing yourself and saying what your affiliation is and what are your main areas of interest.
Okay. So first of all, thank you for making time for this. I appreciate it, and your enthusiasm is greatly appreciated. So my name is Richard Suchenski. I'm an art historian and a film historian. I have a joint PhD in art history and film from Yale. I've published two books. One is on the Taiwanese director Ho Xiaoxin, and the other is called Projections of Memory, Romanticism, Modernism, and the Aesthetics of Film. And I'm working on a third book on the legacies of symbolist aesthetics and artistic debates at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th on films of various periods. What unites all aspects of my work, including film secession, is this interest in film and the other arts, and what I would call the question of style, which to me is not an incidental question. I often have discussions with people just casually or even in an academic context, and they say that they're trying to figure out what it is that's added to a film by all of these things I talk about, by camera movement, by montage, things like that. And I say to them, well, actually, that is the film. And one of my great frustrations is that I don't feel like that's paramount in most of our discussions. One of my real reference points is and has always been Andre Malraux, and he wrote this magisterial, idiosyncratic but magisterial book about the arts. The first version was called The Psychology of Art. The one-volume version is called The Voices of Silence. It has that grandeur of a title, The Voices of Silence. And it goes across different periods, and he ends this critical section by saying, what is art? Art is that whereby forms are transmuted into style. And that to me is what this is all about. Forms are something we can comprehend. Forms are something we engage with. Style is something that we experience in a deep sense, but it opens up all of these other worlds. And I'll give you an example of this that's actually on the Film Secession website now. So I could show you. Let me share my screen real quick.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So I'll go in here into this exhibition.
Mm-hmm. So we are right now looking at the actual website that's accessible online,
That's
and
right.
people can actually go to it and watch this exhibition and others. So, yeah, go ahead.
So I have a section in the Darius Kanji exhibition. Anyone can see this on the Supper at Emmaus and different depictions of this scene. And so we have here a painting from 1628 by Rembrandt. It's an early Rembrandt. It's one of the most shocking of all Rembrandt paintings. And we have another version by Rembrandt here. And then we have this famous Caravaggio painting in the National Gallery in London from 1602. So it's around the same time. And these are the same scene. I mean, in terms of what people talk about content, it's the same content. It's a very critical moment. It's an enigmatic and mysterious moment in the gospel narratives in which you have the risen Christ with his disciples, and they don't recognize him. They don't know what they see. So artists take this as an opportunity to say, well, what is there? How do I understand what's before my eyes? And they do it in very different ways. So here we have the theatricality, the Baroque theatricality of Caravaggio, literally thrusting the hand towards the viewer, the arms outstretched like this. We go up here and we have Rembrandt's version, and it's radically interior. It's so dark, you have to actually stare at the painting to even ascertain what it's about. And as I said, it's the same subject matter. It's the same scene. This is true for many types of paintings. But what distinguishes the Rembrandt and the Caravaggio is style. This is a question of style and it's a question of art. And that's really truly what I'm interested in with all the arts and also with film.
Right. Well, I can only say, by means of beginning our conversation, that I admire your work very much. The book that I read, Projections of Memory, and I actually recommend it to our listeners, is an extremely beautiful example of just the kind of reading that you did right now, only connected to specific examples of film style. The examples that you use range from Tarkovsky to later modernist filmmakers, and it's a wonderful book. But also, and this I want to stress this a lot. The reason I wanted to invite you to the channel and to have this conversation is that, in a strange way, I completely connect to what you are saying. I think that in a way you are my kindred spirit, because as an educator and as an academic who is trying to teach history of film, but also history of film style in my practice at the University of Warsaw at the Liberal Arts Department, the issues that you just mentioned are absolutely crucial, I think, and I'm trying to convey them to my students. And I find it more and more challenging. I wouldn't say difficult, because the students are usually quite receptive to it once you begin this conversation. But the challenge is that the current media landscape completely obliterates, or at least is working towards obliteration of the kind of understanding that you are actually that you just presented, an understanding that would first of all focus on the issue of style as historical phenomena, because it's also very important to understand what came first, and what followed, which artist followed which one, because it's not a succession of artists who were creating in a void as it were. They were actually, it's an ongoing conversation that's happening in between generations. And since I feel that the current social media landscape is eroding, first of all, the perception of nature and nature of time, and of this of this long narrative that's for centuries has been crucial to understanding of arts and history. I find it that my students have a little bit of difficulty with putting things on this timeline, understanding what came before, what followed, and how this conversation is shaped, and how style is the means to having that conversation, to actually engaging with what transpired before in the history of art. And my observation, and this is a question, is that nowadays I feel like the general thrust of discussion of film online and in various forums tends to focus very much on the content of the film, on the plot, on character, and on the emotional response that people can have to that. And that also connects to wider issues of politics, ideology, and other stuff. But the style seems to be somewhere still, very, very far on the list. I know that Film Secession is a project that very much engages young people, your students, and young people that sort of, are coalescing around this idea. Uh, what do you find and fascinating, and what do you find challenging, maybe, in trying to convey what you just said, the importance of style, the sort of, primary nature of style, when you are talking to your students, let's say to people born after 2000, generally speaking? What is the challenge here, and how do you use Film Secession um, to foster this understanding of the issue of style that you just presented?
Yeah. Well, I would say, first of all, I agree with everything you just mentioned. There's one phrase you use that I want to pick up on really quickly, which is the question of the conversation, being part of this conversation. And this is something I often say to my students. I mean, wouldn't you like to be part of a conversation that helps you understand the roots and meaning of everything? And they say, well, I never thought about it that way. Well, that's really what this is. This is an invitation to a dialogue, which, as you also, I think, quite aptly put it, has shaped our understanding of everything for many, many generations. And so we learn from what's there in the past. And I feel like I'm stuck between Scylla and Charybdis here. On the one hand, we have a culture that has just openly embraced superficial gratification and a sort of collective amnesia, as if everything made before 2000, maybe 1970, if I'm generous, is irrelevant and doesn't mean anything. And it's year zero all the time. And we just focus on what's immediately here and now. And I'm interested in what's happening in contemporary cinema. I'm interested in what's happening in all sorts of contemporary arts. But to me, those are always comprehensible more clearly when they're put in dialogue with what's happened in the past. And that idea of a conversation between generations is something that's been important to me from the beginning with this. I wanted young filmmakers, people who are born, even let's say born in the 90s, to have the opportunity to really engage with and learn from people from much earlier generations. So I've taken young filmmakers with me on these trips, and I bring young filmmakers that are 20 years old to meet Zanussi on the one hand, to go have a conversation with Hans-Jürgen Sieberberg, much older filmmakers, not to say this is the past and this is the present, but actually it's part of a continuum and you're part of that. And I want that to be the case for everybody. So I would say there's the positive and negative. The Charybdis side of what I was mentioning, being stuck between one thing and another, is that academic life has its constraints, and I love teaching. I value my students enormously, but there's a sort of timidity to discussions that take place within the academy that also blocks a lot of these things. So you're stuck between the culture at large and a resistance for any number of reasons to really grapple with style, to be part of this conversation. And I don't feel that that's always the case with students. I feel like they're actually quite receptive, as you also put it. They're interested. They just don't always have access, and they don't know where to begin. They don't know how to insert themselves in the conversation. And this project, Film Secession, it really came out of 2020. I was thinking about some of this before, but when COVID hit and everything shut down, the walls felt like they were closing in. And I was very frustrated because people were spending more time at home, but I didn't feel like they were necessarily engaging with things as much as they could or I would like them to. And I wanted something to be there for people that are 20 years old or our age, or for that matter, 60, 70, 80 years old, where they could go online, use all these fantastic tools and resources we have, and learn something, feel like they're learning something constructive. And I don't want them, when I say learn something, some people get scared, they turn off. And I think that's part of the cultural problem you're talking about. I don't mean in the sense that they're being lectured to, but that they're given an opportunity to really learn something on their own. So the autodidactic part of this is important to me. And then the last thing I would say in relationship to your question is access. I really wanted this to be global. I've met people all over the world that are excited by these sorts of ideas, and they genuinely don't have access. I'll give you one example, and I hope this person doesn't mind me mentioning their experience, but in 2016, I was in Singapore with this Secession program I put together, and there was a young Malaysian boy who kept taking the train over every single day to go into these screenings. And I had to actually sneak him into the screenings because there was language and dialect, and the films, they're totally benign films, but they were rated 18 plus because of the Singaporean censorship regime. And he just really was enthusiastic. And he would write to me and say, I don't know how I can learn about these things where I am. Can you point me in the direction of some books? I wrote to him actually recently. I told him, look, I've done Film Secession, here you go. And he's very excited. So I've met people all over. I think the interest is there. I just think the culture is not presenting it in a way that people are inclined to look at. So I have a double challenge now, which is A, making all of this, and then B, getting people's attention. And so the biggest challenge for me is the biggest of those two challenges is getting people to stop the immediate gratification, slow down, and start to explore. And the reason I structured everything the way I did is so that they would explore. That's my partial answer to the question. I think people want to learn. I think they want to engage with really meaningful things. I think they'd like to feel like they're doing it on their own a little bit. So we have something that's a museum without walls that opens up in all sorts of directions. There are guided but non-linear pathways, and people can go in, they can think about a contemporary film, discover some connection with a previous filmmaker, discover paintings, learn about music, maybe get a little lost, save things along the way so they have a trail of breadcrumbs and find their way back. And I think that's how they'll feel less intimidated by the conversation. Because the other aspect of what you mentioned is that because the conversation has more or less completely stopped in the public sphere, people don't know where to begin. I find this with music and painting just as much as I find it with film, that people are naturally interested, but they just don't know how to become part of that conversation. And I want them to find a way in, but to do that in an informed way and to grow in a deep sense from the experience.
Mhm. There are many thoughts here that I really love. I always say to my friends and even to students that, on one hand, we are living in a world that pretty much fulfills many of the cinephile dreams that I was nurturing when I was growing up. Because, when I was growing up and I was discovering the world of cinema, probably my biggest problem was access, because the access was so narrow at that time, to simply to get my hands on those films that I wanted to watch. So, had I known that, at one point in the future I will have such easy access through, social and through media platforms to classic films, to whole filmographies of people like Fritz Lang or Otto Preminger or Jean Renoir, I would have been absolutely thrilled. And in a way, I remained thrilled by the fact that it's all there in some fashion. Not all, of course, there are always those areas, of film history that need constantly to be reminded of and to need to, sort of new explorers. But still, the choice that is being offered in terms of engaging with great works of film art is huge nowadays. However, I never, as I was dreaming this dream, and perhaps you were dreaming it as well, we never, foresaw that the price to pay will be this terror of immediacy that we are living in now, right? I mean, the absolute dismantling of the perception of time as a linear phenomenon, the constant now that you mentioned, and which actually breeds some situations that are sometimes borderline humorous, I would say. I will never forget when 1 year after the premiere of The Tree of Life at Cannes, I was speaking to a friend and I mentioned the Tree of Life winning the Golden Palm last year, and he said, "Oh, but that was so long ago," And I 1 year only
Oh,
passed. So if 1 year is enough to obliterate cultural memory of a film, then we are in a very different era from let's say 60s and 70s, and those moments in which films had this sort of long-lasting effect. You can sense this when you are reading, for example, film criticism from 1970s and 1980s. The deep sense of a tradition being continued is very much present in film criticism of the day, which is why I often assign to my students, this is a digression, but it's actually connected to what you are saying, film writing by authors who were publishing in outlets like, Film Comment or even Sight and Sound in the 1970s, 60s, even 1980s. Somebody like Raymond Dergnat, for example, or many, many other authors, the list is long, were writing essays of such depth of feeling and perception and knowledge that sometimes, current film criticism can feel a little bit shallow, and it's not just a nostalgic, impulse on my part. It's just the sense that the now nowadays is so brutal in its dominance. It's very, very sort of sucking everything up, our attention, our time, our
yeah.
days, our nights, and our evenings. So I think that what you are saying is absolutely crucial. Please tell me a little bit about the logistics, but also the scope of the project. I do remember we met in Poland, and thanks to your invitation, we co-hosted a screening of Krzysztof Zanussi's Illumination at
Oh,
Kino Muranów in Warsaw. Krzysztof Zanussi was present. I know that also your students met with him, you filmed an interview with him, but I know that there are many more filmed interviews with filmmakers,
yeah.
mostly older filmmakers, that you recorded. Is this material available, or how it will be made available in the coming months, years? Because I feel like you really amassed a unique archive of material by traveling, by filming, and by engaging with older filmmakers and also making them meet young cinephiles.
Well, that's a really good question. I would say, first of all, the travel component of this is important. One thing I'm doing that is very much against the grain. I don't want anything, any aspect of this to feel generic. The idea of capturing the experience of natural light, of things feeling like a genuine conversation is very important. That only happens when you go to locations, you get a sense of the environment out of which certain works emerge, and also the spaces in which people feel comfortable. So I have done about 40 of these shoots. They're almost all done in people's homes or nearby. So that's a real act of persuasion to get people to devote that kind of time. Sometimes the conversations actually go for 6 hours. People allocate one and we're still there 6 hours later, and then I have to edit that all together and try to make a sort of meaningful film. But it's not just the film. Those are the interviews at the beginning of each exhibition. It's then putting the other materials together, archive materials, the essays that are in there, and designing the cross-linking. The real heart of this to me, a film Secession, what it's all about, is about these exhibitions in which you can, virtual exhibitions, engage in a serious conversation with a particular filmmaker about their work, about the past, about earlier filmmakers' work, and then learn about their world and then find ways through to other things. The richest one up there now is the one on John Borman, and I'm very grateful to John Borman. First of all, he gave me a huge amount of time. He gave me an enormous archive, which took months and months for me to go through. And there are sections in there on, I could show you this really quickly while I'm talking.
That would be great. I just saw there's a new book on Zardos. It was published literally a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, that's definitely a film that I talk about, but it's an unusual film to say the least.
Yes, with unusual costume design.
So the environment here is meant to seem both very new and very old, if I can say this. I was inspired by a couple things. One is the design of Cedric Gibbons, Art Deco design. Another is the idea of the Vienna Secession, hence the title. But another one is actually much older, and it's the ancient art of memory. There's a wonderful book about this by Francis Yates, going all the way back 2,500 years to the ancient Greeks. And they spoke about memory as being a constitutive element of rhetoric. This may sound very uninteresting to people, but rhetoric was for many centuries one of the fundamental liberal arts. This was at the core of education. Even someone like St. Augustine was a scholar of rhetoric. I mean, he was trained to focus on rhetoric. And in the Middle Ages also, this was really important. And they spoke about memory as an art that you trained yourself to understand. It's totally the antithesis of what you were just speaking about the nowness of everything. And the even spacing of images actually provides a way for us to map out space, and in mapping out space to begin to find our way through the structure of things. So I wanted something that had aspects of that actually activated deep memory, but also provided new conduits. So as I said, something very new and very old at the same time. So this interview film is in 4 parts. It runs for about 3 hours altogether. So you can come in here, and you can engage with parts of it. You can stop, come back. You can find your way back again. We all shot this in Ireland at his home. And then in the second room, we move through. This is production material. We have here scripts. We have production designs, art designs, storyboards. Borman storyboarded everything, so you can look at the storyboarding process and sequences from related films. This section is all on parallel editing by Borman. This is from Griffith's Abraham Lincoln. By other filmmakers going up to the present. So you can learn about different aspects of that. And then even here, you can jump. You can go to the film music exhibition. You can go to related films in the cinema, sections on music that are in this exhibition and elsewhere. Let me go back.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm blocked by the
No, that's okay. How uh, the website was launched, I guess, 3 months ago. Do I remember
About
correctly?
a month and a half ago.
About a month and a half ago. Right, right, right.
So
And
this is on different aspects of Romanticism. And so these paintings open up not just discussions of the individual paintings, but for example, here, this is on viewing positions. So there's a heavy discussion of Friedrich, but it goes back much further than that also. Um, so we go all the way back to the Renaissance, the importance of perspective, of thinking about space. And then if you go all the way down, we engage with filmmakers. This is someone I know we were both very attached to. And I did shoot with him, Terence Davies,
mm,
about a year and a half before he passed. I was quite shocked by that one.
yes,
You mentioned older filmmakers. I have interviewed filmmakers in their 90s, quite a few. So by those standards, Terence Davies was pretty young, but he still passed. And I'll come back to that in just a moment.
hmm
I need to move this so I can access. Okay, so the Romanticism section, you can learn about all sorts of different things here. Discover Borman's relationship. I mean, Zardoz is certainly very relevant to everything here. This is all in William Blake. This is a
hmm
section on poetry and myth. Um, then we go to this final section on film music. Each of these opens up into a whole other world. This is the use of particular music. So Tristan, Parsifal, the ring cycle, the Carmina Burana, and each of these goes off. So if we go here, for example, and I'm interested in this aspect of Excalibur, I could find my way over to the film music exhibition, to certain films, to particular discussions of leitmotifs from within the film music exhibition.
mm,
It has a whole analysis of how leitmotifs actually operate with music, with clips, with text, all of these things combined. And this is what I meant by saving it for later exploration.
hmm
Everybody can form their own profile. You can go all the way, end up 5 steps away from where you thought, and find things again. Um, so that's an example of the immensity of what I'm trying to do here. And so to answer your question about where all of this is, I have a lot of material in the pipe. It takes a lot of time to put things together, but I also want people to feel like there's a progressive unfolding and enriching of what's happening, so that each month a new exhibition is opened up that's about a particular filmmaker, but new through lines with the existing exhibitions are opened up. New
mm,
films are added every week that are related to that exhibition and also open up new through lines to what's already been there. So last night, for example, I introduced a new Japanese film with a Benshi soundtrack, which you cannot find on the
mm,
internet very easily at all. And you could go in there and it connects to the current Hamaguchi exhibition, but it also goes back to that section on cross-cutting in the Borman exhibition. And there's some discussion of Griffith that again links back to the Borman exhibition, but also to the Hamaguchi exhibition. And I don't want that to feel too overwhelming. So the once a month structure is both practical, going back to your logistics question, and part of the design so that people feel like they can allocate a reasonable amount of time. I would say if people spend, even 30 minutes a week, they'll discover something, they'll learn something, and they'll feel like this is growing and growing, and they can therefore become part of the conversation in a way that is
hmm
dynamic and individual, but also exciting. So that's why it's structured that way. But the other part of your question about who I've been speaking with, older filmmakers, where does that come from? It comes from a sense that younger filmmakers are in a way disconnected from that conversation you were mentioning. They don't have access to it, but many of them would like to. So I want to connect generations that way. But also I had a couple of very unusual experiences right around the time, shortly after COVID hit. I was in touch with Bertrand Tavernier, who I liked very much and had known for years, and he was excited about this. And he passed away before I had the chance to shoot anything with him. And I felt increasing urgency at that point to try to meet with the older filmmakers as quickly as I could before this happened with more people, and I never had the chance to talk with them. So, this would be James Ivory, Perry Portabella, Jerry Schatzberg. The exhibition's coming up next month. I mentioned Zieberberg, Marcelo Fools. My great regret was Godard. We exchanged messages. He liked Projections of Memory. He sent me this very kind handwritten note, and we were going to shoot. But then we had one lockdown restriction after another, and we could never schedule it. And he passed away. So that will never happen. I will have a Godard exhibition down the line. I'm figuring out what to do about filmmakers who are no longer here. Um, how to summon that up, conversations with other people, bringing the materials together. But that's an ongoing process. But it's not just, I want to stress this, it's not only filmmakers in their 90s. I mean, I've also spoken with Apichipongwe Setakul, the Hamaguchi exhibition that just went up, Lynn Ramsey, James Gray, Olivier Assayas, he's older now, but Arnaud Desplechin, a range of filmmakers of many ages. I would say the youngest is around our age. It goes from
Mhm.
our age up, but I
Okay,
definitely want to get a sense of multiple generations in play.
right.
And all of them, by the way, speaking about classic cinema. So if you go to the Hamaguchi exhibition and you watch the portrait film, it's about an hour and a half, and 45 minutes of it, 50 minutes of it is talking about Nalise, talking about Cassavetes, talking about various older filmmakers, even from a generation before him. And that will also open up new through lines. So Lynn Ramsey, spoiler for the next one, also talked in great detail about Cassavetes.
Mm,
So there's now a connection between Lynn Ramsey and between Hamaguchi. And sometimes these are surprising. James Gray wanted to speak about Moby Dick, which I was happy to do, but
mhm,
that's also a shared passion for Lynn Ramsey. It's a shared passion for Claire Denis.
mm.
It connects with the poetry and myth section of the John Borman exhibition. So every
Mm.
time one of these things comes up, it's not just that you'll learn about what's in that exhibition, but you'll see what's already there afresh.
Right, right. I'm not surprised since Beau Travail was an adaptation of
Yeah,
Melville, right?
exactly.
An indirect one. But that's fascinating, and it connects in many ways to things that I also try to do online, especially with my podcast. This idea of creating a platform for film education. A podcast is a very specific form of engagement. It basically replicates the situation of an academic lecture in my case. But here, what you are talking about is sort of this interconnected network of meanings, of tropes, which sounds exciting to me. This also seems like a very big project. Do I understand correctly that there's a team of people behind all this, or are you heroically putting everything online by yourself?
I would say something in between the two.
Hmm.
So yes, it's a big task. There's a lot of work. I want people to feel involved in various ways. I do have people that help me with various things, especially with the shoots. And as I said, I really try to connect generations with these shoots, to bring younger people and have them meet with their predecessors and learn from that. And you mentioned the experience in Poland. That's another aspect of this. So not only do I want people to have these experiences in virtual space, but I want them to feel invited to events in physical space and for these to be related in meaningful ways. So I did bring quite a few people to Poland in 2022. That's a template for the type of event that I want to happen much more regularly. There are things planned in many cities starting in the second half of this year. If people travel out, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, if you're nearby, please join us. And I want another set of conversations to take place in actual locations so that all of these things are interrelated, and most of those are filmed, and there will be different ways in which that connects to the exhibitions as well.
Mhm. One absolutely practical question. Now, I'm sure that all of our listeners are wondering what is the best way to engage with this project? I mean, what they should do? They should go to the website. Is there a newsletter? Can you just tell us how to become a part of this and how to benefit from everything that you are putting out there?
So yes, you should go to the website. It's filmsecession.com. I'm sure we'll provide a link on the
Yes.
YouTube page so you can go there directly. You can go to the About page and learn more about why this is happening, and then please go to the membership page. It's sort of related to your other question. I am doing this independently. This is a project that, and there are many advantages to that, including the ability to make these things available globally. If I can just quickly jump back to something you mentioned before, I was doing this partially with the 10-year-old version of myself in mind, or maybe the 15-year-old version. I was very excited about the internet and these possibilities, and I've been increasingly dismayed with the way it's been used and the sort of collective forgetting I was speaking about before. But there are still these possibilities that are really exciting. You can have clips, you can have images, you can have videos. Um, I don't think that films are as available as one might think. Or let me put it this way, it's a strange environment in which people don't know what to look for. They don't know what to find. So I would sometimes show films by Ernst Lubitsch from 1917 in a class, and people would get very excited. Wow, we've never seen this before, and it's available online somewhere, and they don't know where to find it. So I want people to feel like they can go here, learn what's exciting, and have something that's more manageable to work their way through. And the best way to do that is to become a member. I do need subscriptions just to keep this operating and to keep bringing films in to work with archives to put the interviews together. We also have social media networks. I'm sure we can also provide links through all of the different platforms, but that's mainly designed to get people to the site. The main thing you can do is go there. There is a trial exhibition. There are free films. You can find your way through, and then hopefully you'll be inspired to join up and participate, and then to come to the events that will start very soon.
Right. So some of the contents is in open access, and the rest of the contents is behind this paywall for subscribers,
That's
right?
right. That's right. Yeah.
Okay. And do you know already, and are you at liberty to tell us what are some of the upcoming events, live events that people will be able to meet you and to discuss further? Because I feel like this is definitely a project that will grow through actual social networks, and I mean by meeting
Yeah.
other people in physical spaces, as you mentioned, not only on online. So the next couple of months we'll see some of those live events as well.
Yes, there will be a presentation in Amsterdam in May. There will be about a week of activities in Antwerp in July. And then there will be events in a bunch of other cities closer to home for me, New York. There will be things in Los Angeles, London, Paris. I'm planning more things in Poland before long, in Japan shortly thereafter. So this will all go up if you go to the website on the events page. But again, you can also follow on social media. The best thing I would say, if you're hesitating, let me speak to those people for a moment. First of all, this is going to grow and grow. There are more and more filmmakers that are there. I don't want people to be scared off because they don't know a filmmaker. I don't want people to say, oh, I don't know who Jerry Schatzberg is. I'm not interested. The goal is for you to become interested in Schatzberg's work, but also to find a way through that into other things. So for example, we'll talk about photography and film. There will be a whole section there, which links up with the Darius Kanji exhibition. So everybody will find what they're interested in, and more will be added that way. But if you are hesitating, please at least get on the mailing list. So you can go on the website and go to the bottom, join the newsletter. And I send these out every week. And that provides information on what's happening, what's coming up. And I will tell you that's been growing and growing. I mean, it's been more or less growing by 50% every week. So that's been pretty dramatic. And I'd be happy to have as many people as possible on that list.
That's fantastic, and I do hope that this conversation also brings new people to the site. One last question I have, and this is pure curiosity, because I'm just wondering, as you are introducing the history of film and history of the arts to new generations, are there any particular filmmakers that you find are speaking very strongly to the new generations? I mean, of course, let's say classical filmmakers born, either of our age or older, as you mentioned. But were there moments when you were actually surprised by how alive your young audience was to a work that predates them by sometimes many decades? Are there any favorites?
I have that all the time, I would say. Yeah, and some of them are filmmakers that you've mentioned. Tarkovsky seems to resonate more and more, which I'm always happy about. Hitchcock, in a way, seems more and more removed from contemporary culture, but I find people get very excited about that. I know that's a passion that we both share.
Yeah.
Maybe less well-known filmmakers. Jean Vigo is always a surprise, which is always great to see. Silent film, which is a big part of the site right now and will continue to be, but it's particularly prominent because of the exhibitions I have at the beginning. That's always a surprise. When I tell people we're going to go watch a film from 1927 and it's German,
Mm.
that doesn't necessarily inspire great enthusiasm from the beginning. But I find this with students. I find this when I present films. They generally love silent films. There's a sort of pure visual communication. Of course, it's in dialogue with what's happening with the music and what's happening on screen with the text, but there's an intensity and integrity to the imagery that really resonates and connects with people. And I would say that's perhaps the most interesting through line for me in all of these interviews with filmmakers that are 40 years old and filmmakers that are 95. is a real love and passion for silent cinema.
Hmm. Yes, and this is also something that I can connect to because last year, in 2023, I published this on my podcast channel. I did this 10-part episode devoted to my favorite films, 100 of my favorite films, the top 100. So I was revealing them, in succession, and slowly climbing up to the top 10. And my favorite film of all time, of course, it's always a game a little bit, and it's difficult to say if it will change or not. But it's actually La Talente by Vigo. That's my favorite film of all time. And Roman Gutek was very generous. He proposed to show those films
Mm.
at Muranov Kino, at Kino Muranov, where you actually visited to see Illumination. I was extremely happy about that, and the director of Muranov, Adam Trzopek, was also open to this. And what they did, they programmed all of my top 10 films, and they were shown at Muranov. And I have to say, it was an incredible experience that not only allowed me to see some of those films on a big screen for the first time, because I have never seen Intolerance, for example, on the big screen, and it is one of those top 10.
Yeah.
The response was incredible. All of the screenings were sold out. People came not only from Warsaw, some of my listeners came even from the south of Poland. They traveled to attend those screenings. And the first screening was a double bill of Sherlock Jr. And City Lights, so Keaton and Chaplin. And I actually have a short video, I will send you a link to it, of a full house reacting to the boxing match in City Lights,
Mm.
bursting out laughing. Young people, parents brought their children. There were elderly people in the audience as well, and they all reacted in unison to this incredible sequence because it is an incredibly choreographed and conceived scene. And as I was sitting there, and I felt those waves of joy and laughter. Um, I, I was a little bit of pessimist during the pandemics because I had this fatalistic view that maybe film culture is actually ending. Maybe we will
But the same.
never come back, to this experience. I was really pessimistic at that time, but this gave me this optimistic jolt. But I will tell you just one thing, and this may be even like a tagline for some of the film secession activities. After the screening of Intolerance, which is 2 hours and 50 minutes in the version that we watched with Carl Davis's score, and the digital print was pristine. It was fantastic. But I was a little bit concerned about this film in particular. It's a film from 1916, which really may feel antiquated to many, many people. However, the audience was engrossed in the film throughout the 3 hours. And there was one man, I guess in his late 20s. Afterwards, we always had a discussion, and the discussions lasted at least an hour, sometimes an hour and a half, late into the night. And this guy, he raised his hand, and what he said completely, obliterated me. It was so wonderful. He said, this is the first silent film I ever saw. And, Intolerance to be the first is, it may seem like a steep introduction, and he said that, it took some adjusting to the first 10 minutes. I had to adjust to it. But afterwards, it was fantastic. I loved it. And he used this interesting comparison. He said, when we go to see Avatar, because that was the time of Avatar 2, we also put on those glasses and we need our eyes to adjust to this convention of 3D. And here I felt like I needed to adjust to the convention of the silent film. So in a way, he drew a straight line, through from Griffith to Cameron. In a way, they are similar. That's another topic. Saying simply, and I guess that connects a little bit also to what we started with, that it's all a matter of language, of style. Once you are able to refocus your eyes and ears to a particular style, particular time, there's no limit on what you can experience at the movies. You can even be, someone born in 2000 watching Intolerance in 2023. being engrossed for 3 hours. So this is something that I feel also strongly about, and I feel that it also animates your feeling about your project.
I think it's absolutely paramount. And I would say that it has to be matched with the word I use a couple times on the site in the introductory materials, the video at Olana, for example, discernment. I think discernment's really important. And my response to what you were talking about, the sense that the film experience as we have known it is disappearing and may never
Mm.
come back, was to do something like this, not to eradicate movie theaters. I have no interest in that whatsoever. I believe very much in the type of screening you're describing. I think that's very important and valuable. It's to contextualize it and get people interested in it, because we're so saturated with different kinds of information flows and things that tell us, again, like, look at this right now, that you don't know what to look at. You don't know where to direct your eyes. And so I want people to maybe get directed, as you say, these are the films you should look at, and then you find your way in from there. But then to feel like they're training their own eyes, that in the experience of going online, they're not simply losing their attention span and forgetting something or just wasting time, but that instead they're learning something, they're cultivating something, and they're gaining an ability to see themselves, even a connection, like you mentioned, between Griffith and James Cameron, that all of these things are in dialogue. I haven't spoken to James Cameron. I bet if I did, he would tell me that he's interested in Griffith also. I've been surprised. Griffith is John Ford and Griffith have been the two filmmakers that have come up most frequently with everybody I've spoken with everywhere around the world.
Ah, that's very interesting. Yeah, I think there is a connection between Griffith and Cameron. I mean, when you look especially at their utopian mindsets, because intolerance ends with this utopian vision of, all mankind
Yeah.
uniting and basically ascending to heaven. And that's not that far from, some of the stuff in Avatar too. I feel that Cameron is also inclined to project his dreams very, very largely. Um, is there anything that you would like to add, or anything that you would like to share before we end this?
Well, on the subject of utopianism, I mean, I don't want to say this is a Don Quixote project at all, but there is something I'm interested in, that passion and enthusiasm you have from these filmmakers. I mean, Fritz Lang at one point gave a speech in which he said that cinema will reverse the Tower of Babel and it will provide this universal language of communication. And this is the utopianism of the silent era, that now we can do away with all of these restrictions of language and border, and we can communicate in some new way. And obviously that was shattered brutally in the 1930s and especially the 1940s. And so we're not even immediate post-war anymore. We're in some other place and we're quite far removed from that world of 100 years ago. But I think that idea of cinema is still there, that there's something new and exciting about cinema. And I should say, I'm not a techno-utopian, but I feel this with some of the technology, that there are possibilities for us to have this conversation. We could be doing the same thing if you were in Poland. We could be doing the same thing if you were in Thailand or Uruguay. I mean, we could just have this conversation, and that's exciting. And what I'm trying to do on the site is to tap that excitement, point it in new directions, but also find ways of taking what's very, very new, going back to something I said before, and connecting it to the deep riches of the past. I don't want people to feel like these things are blocked off, forced, but instead to find them exciting and inspiring. And I have every confidence that that's happening. That does seem to be what's going on with the mailing list week to week, as I mentioned before, and I want this to reach as many people as possible.
That's absolutely great. I truly believe that it's possible as well. I'm sometimes excited, sometimes also a little scared by by all the possibilities that are online. But it's as with everything. It's a matter of discernment and passionate and wise usage of those tools. And I do find it a little bit magical. And I mentioned it when we talked in Poland, and I mentioned it in several conversations I had with cinephiles across the globe, because this is something that I find truly almost spiritual, I would say, is that you as a cinephile, as someone passionate about the art of the moving image, you can travel to a very, very remote area from where you grew up, and suddenly you are meeting tribe members, members of the same tribe. You speak to someone, as you said, from Uruguay, you mention a name, let's say it's Burman, let's say it's Vigo, let's say it's Chantal Ackerman, and suddenly, they light up because you are referring to this shared experience, right? And this is the magic of film festivals also. I always say, because I traveled a lot, especially as a festival programmer, you arrive jet lagged and tired, and you're consuming ungodly amounts of coffee to survive through a morning screening, and then you bump into somebody that you saw 3 years ago across the globe at a different film festival, and you pick up the conversation, and the conversation never ends because there is this shared passion that you have, and this is something I always loved. It's the closest, I guess, that we can get to this very romantic notion that I always cherished of sea travels in 19th century. Of being on a ship, or visiting those ports, and talking to people from different walks of life. This is still something that I feel very strongly about, and I guess for me it's a romantic dimension of this adventure with cinema going. So I do hope that our viewers will check out the website. All the information is in the video description. So please follow it. I'm sure that if you decide to get in touch with Richard directly through the website, he will also be happy to engage with you and answer your questions. And thank you so much for your time, for your passion. And I keep my fingers crossed, and I'm sure that this network will grow, and hopefully we will see each other again live soon. So thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you very much. And yes, I'm sure we will.
And do I, I was looking at your bookshelf, and I think that you did the same thing as I did. So your books are organized by the last name of the director, right? Yeah, because I recognize Preminger and there's Renoir, and so I have exactly the same organization on my book.
And it's funny. This is one thing I do, because I'm exactly like you. I start looking at people's bookshelves when I'm watching a podcast or when I go meet them. And I find very few filmmakers actually organize it that way. So one of the things I do when I get to their house and while my crew's setting up is I start looking at their bookshelves, see how it's organized, and try to develop some questions from that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
maybe
because my bookshelf is quite similar in that I see that there's a succession of alphabetical order by director, not by author. Yeah, as I said, kindred spirits.